In this video, we're going to take a look at the Emerald Grotto in Chapter 1 of Call of the Netherdeep. In the last video, we covered the Festival of Merit. If you haven't seen that yet, you can check that out in a link somewhere down below, or maybe a card up here, I don't know. And we will, of course, be trying to cover more aspects of the adventure in future videos. So if you want more of that, please subscribe to the channel and like this video, and let us know in the comments down below what you would like to see a video on. Now, without further ado, let's take a look at the Emerald Grotto. The Emerald Grotto is basically the end of the chapter where the characters are gonna go into this grotto as part of the final challenge of the day, where they'll be going up against their rivals, which they have hopefully had some run-ins with during the festival. So the Emerald Grotto is basically just an aquatic dungeon. There are some above water places, but most of the dungeon is underwater, and luckily the characters are given potions of water breathing, so they'll have no issues swimming through and breathing within the dungeon. The way the race is set up is that as soon as the whistle is blown, so to speak, the characters and the rivals are heading into the dungeon simultaneously, and they'll be making initiative checks to decide who is gonna go first. It is a bit wonky and a bit hard to maybe let the characters know exactly how that's looking. Can they start casting spells at their rival, attacking them? And the answer is yes, they can. They can do that stuff immediately, but the way that we ran it in our game, and I suggest you do, is sort of just let that be up to the player's imagination unless they specifically ask. And then already at E3, where the path branches off, the characters will be heading in a different direction than their rivals. So that sort of weird visual is gonna end. Now, E3 Cavern Fork is also where we run into our first issue with the dungeon, and that is that it tells us that if the rivals were getting ahead of the characters, Maggie is blocking the path up ahead, and she is telling the characters to take the eastern path because her friends took the other path. Now, if your players are like most players, they'll probably be sort of insulted at this and maybe decide that just because she's telling them to go the other way, they're gonna go the way that she doesn't want them to go. And then the adventure let us know that Maggie is gonna defend herself if they try to get past her and attack her. Now, I think the adventure works best if the characters and the rivals are not fierce, bloody enemies from the get-go. So what you can do here is that if it turns violent, if the characters start attacking Maggie, she quickly backs off, says, all right, it's just a competition, let's not get ahead of ourselves. She's not interested in laying down her life just to steer the characters in another direction. This can, of course, give you an issue if the characters then catch up to the rivals, but in that case, I'd probably just say that the rivals are gonna make it faster through, just so you don't get a scenario where you have to sort of ad hoc a combat in the middle of the dungeon. Now, if you're lucky, the characters are just gonna take another route than the rivals, in which case you won't really run into that issue at all. Beyond that, the dungeon runs mostly fine until we get to E8, Riptide Tunnel, where there is a tablet that is creating a current that the characters will have to either swim through, or they have to destroy the tablet in order to swim through without being delayed. Now, the players may not realize that they have to destroy the tablet or that they can just swim through, and they may do what my players did in this case, and that was turning the tablet around and asking me, well, what happens now? What I decided is that the tablet is now spewing out a current in the opposite direction, so they're actually getting a boost, and it'll make it down that tunnel even faster. So I'll just leave that tip for you there if they do decide to manipulate the tablet instead of destroying it. Well, the next issue I have with this dungeon, and by far the biggest issue, is in E10, the Moonshark lair. There are a few different things that I think is wrong with the Moonshark lair. First off, it's a giant shark. Even with that bonus action it's gotten, it's still a really boring combatant. So that's one thing I want to address. For the second thing, we're told that the amulet thingy that the characters are after has been put around the shark's body so they can grab that. That's cool. But we're also told that there's a spear in the shark side, a spear enchanted by Sehanine the Moonweaver, which sounds awesome. It's also a spear that gives the sharks magical abilities. Again, pretty cool. But we're not told who put the spear there, why they put the spear there, what is the spear. We know it's enchanted, but is it a magic item? All of those questions are unanswered, and I think that's really weird. I was looking for it when I was preparing for the adventure. So what I did instead was create something for the spear. Some statistics. We made a magic item for the spear that we published over at the patreon.com/Eventyr, and which you can also find for free in the description down below. And we published that alongside an alternative stat block for the Moonshark that retains its CR and everything, but gives it some really cool moon-like abilities that sort of makes it feel more magical and special. You're still left with the question of, who put the spear there and why. Now that's not a mystery I necessarily needed the characters to have explained, except that I decided that it wasn't the druids, it's not the inhabitants of Jirgo who's done it, it's something that is an aspect of the Apotheon's presence in the cave. The characters are not really gonna find out exactly what happened with the spear, and I think that's fine. There's some mystery here, but we really do need statistics for the spear. We really do need a more interesting shark, so that's what I did, and again, you can download that in the description down below. The dungeon wraps up with the characters getting an opportunity to touch this Jewel of Three Prayers and get a vision from the Apotheon, and we get a lot of information about how to handle that, if the characters touch it, if the rivals touch it, if the rivals are hostile, if the rivals are friendly, and so on. I think it actually works fine and best if the characters are the one that touches the amulet, and I think that the book does a decent job of telling us how we can make that happen. But I would also say that you can't just decide that they get the vision. If they're not interested in what's inside that cave for some reason, they're about to just sort of leave the quest lying there, just have them get the vision. It's all magical, it's all religious and funky stuff. There doesn't need to be an explicit reason why it's exactly them getting the vision, why it's exactly the rivals getting the visions, and so on. You can even decide that everyone in that cave is getting the vision, including both the rivals and the characters, which sort of gives an impetus for the rivals for why they're actually also looking to get ahead and find the Jewel of Three Prayers, get it awakened and all that stuff, and why they may want to try and steal the amulet from the characters if they have it, and the other way around. So I think that can actually work really well as well, especially if the characters and the rivals are not that good friends. Maybe they are already slightly hostile towards one another. That's a way to really make it a competition between the two factions. Both think they're destined to save the Apotheon, and maybe both are correct, but they'll have to find out for themselves which of them are actually going to be the real heroes of the story. And that's essentially where the chapter ends. In the next chapter we're going to learn a bit more about how this vision is going to send them towards Basusan, which of course is the next step of the journey. All I say here is that I think the Emerald Grotto runs pretty well as written. I think they've actually managed to do a good job at keeping track of rounds, creating a scenario that feels dynamic, and beyond these slight errors and inconsistencies with the shark, for example, and the spear, I think it's a well-written little scenario. It's a fun little dungeon. It's not likely to be the most challenging dungeon for your characters, but it is, if you take a few steps, improve the shark, for example, it's going to be a fun adventure for the characters. And that's really the most important thing. So yeah, if you like this video, I would urge you to become a patron over at patreon.com/eventyr and help support us making videos such as this and get access to a whole lot of cool 5e encounters. You can also, of course, just like the video, subscribe to it, and maybe leave a comment telling us what you'd like to see a video on regarding the Critical Role Call of the Netherdeep adventure. And beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say, except thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.